Hi, if you're looking at this video, you're probably one of many shooting enthusiasts across the world. And if you're an enthusiast, you probably have been conversations regarding 306 and 308 Winchester. And by now realize that each of these have a staunch group of supporters prepared to go 15 rounds for the caliber that they prefer. Just to consider, these two, I think a good starting point is to go back and look at the origin of these two calibers. In order to do that, we need to go back about 120 years, around the late 1890s, when the US Army were issued with 30 US or 30 Army, or alternatively named the 3040 Krag Jorgensen rifles. The 3040 refers to 30 caliber projectile being pushed by 40 grains of propellant, around 2,000 feet a second for the 220 round nose projectiles that they were shooting out of a 30-inch barrel. Now, the US Army issued their soldiers with these, and the soldiers that were carrying these rifles in 1898 were in the conflict, the Spanish-American War, and on the receiving end of the 1893 Spanish Mauser and 7x57, and had similar experiences to the British in South Africa during the Boer War. And it didn't take long to realize that the 7x57 were ballistically far superior to what they were carrying. So in the early 1900s, the US Army were looking for ways to improve what they had. And the 3003 came out of that, which was basically some experiments being done with the 3040, trying to get higher velocities. But when they reached around 2,200 feet a second out of that platform, they started finding the Krag Jorgensen bolts were cracking on the locking lugs. And they abandoned that, approached Springfield, who were building the 1903 Springfield, and asked them if they could do anything that could put them on an even keel with the 7x57. So in around 1906, Springfield basically had gone to a Mauser type action and abandoned the 3040 Krag cage, which had a prominent extraction ridge sticking out of the end of the case, and they went to basically a groove similar to the 7x57 Mauser. Another advantage of going to the groove is, like the Mausers, that could be fed by stripper clips, which were really quick to load the magazines, while the Krag Jorgensens you had to open a side panel and load the magazine one round at a time. So there were other advantages for going that way. Around 1906, they were loading 150 grain projectiles at 2,700 feet a second, and it was basically the legendary 306 Springfield that we have today, a 30 caliber projectile out of a case accepted in 1906, and also reference to Springfield, who developed it. Now, from the 306, a whole host of cartridges were developed, such as the 270 Winchester, the 35 Whelan, 280 Remington, and a whole host of others like the 2506 and other calibers that are more modern. About 45 years later, the US Ordnance Department had another look at the 306 and realized with the propellants of those days there was a huge unused area in the cartridge. So they were looking for something a bit more effective and efficient, and started a project to try and develop the 760x51 NATO. Now, the project started out with the 300 Savage case, called the T65, when they started developing it, but it didn't take long before they realized that the capacity of the 300 Savage case was just such that they couldn't get close to 306 performance out of it, which they were really hoping to get. So what they ended up doing is they took a 306 case, which is 762x63, and they cut it back 12 millimeters to get rid of the empty space, and found they could get 95 to 93% of the velocity that you get out of a 306 out of that little compact cartridge that they created. Winchester looked at it and saw the huge potential, and in 1952 presented to the public the 308 Winchester, which is 400 to the 7.62 by 51 NATO that was accepted in 1954. There were very slight differences between the two. The NATO couldn't be loaded to the pressures of the 308 Winchester, but they're almost identical. From the 308 line of cases, a whole heap of other cartridges developed that are legendary and lovely, such as the 243 Winchester, the 260 Remington 708, the 358 Winchester, and a whole host of others by A Square and Sabi and a lot of other people who like to use existing cases to make different calibers. If you consider the similarities between the 308 and the 306, if you buy a packet of projectiles off the shelf to load 308 or 306, it's exactly the same projectile. So you can load exactly the same projectile in a 308 case or a 306 case. You get a bit more velocity out of the 306. There's a range between 110 and 250 grains of projectiles available, and a whole wide variety, a vast variety of different factory offerings in both these cartridges for different applications. Now, the one of the drivers for the popularity is the fact that there are military surplus ammo available, and especially in times of scarcity, this drives the popularity hugely. But in some countries you have ammo from the military available in both the calibers. If you look at the differences, if you compare these projectiles weight by weight for a 308 and a 306, there's between 50 and 150 feet a second difference between the two. You gain a flatter trajectory with the 306, but the complaint is that you have to contend with more recoil. Now, if you consider recoil, and it's probably a good thing then to stand back a little bit and look at it from a scientific perspective. Now, if you think back to your kindergarten physics, and you remember Newton's 3 laws of motion, you will probably agree that if you have two identical guns, one for each of the calibers, that weigh exactly the same and push exactly the same projectile at exactly the same velocity out of a barrel, that if you stick those information in the equations on either side of the equal sign, that the recoil will be exactly the same. So it's just a matter of contending with what you gain. If you have high velocity, you're going to have to contend with slight more recoil, but I mean, you consider 95% performance of the 306 coming from the 308, there's not that big a difference between them. Also, if recoil is a problem, you can tame it by using muzzle brakes, or where it can be done within the law, you can use silencers, which make it really easy to handle and really nice to shoot. It takes, especially the silencers take the noise component out of the equation too. And now if we consider the 308 again, they are usually popular for tactical, military and target work. And in that environment, there's a lot more offerings in 308 than in 306. But the inherent accuracy that the 308 have has a lot to do with the fact that they are popular for target shooting, and that a lot of development work has been done, and you can get really neat match reamers for the chambers on these guns. If you want to have a really accurate 306 rifle, the modern manufacturing abilities and tools available, if you put it in the right hands, will give you a rifle that is very, very comparable with the 308, and you will probably not see much of a difference between the two accuracy-wise. The advantage of the 308 is that you can carry a lot more ammunition for it for the same weight, because there's about 19 or 20% space saving. They are really, really compact, and you only sacrifice 5 to 7% in velocity. If that is a main issue for you, the 306 is probably for you. And if you want to operate near the edge of the cartridge capability. The closer you get to the edge, the bigger the difference between the 308 and 306 become, but it's still not a huge difference. 306, with modern powders and the VLD projectiles available, can be made into a really sweet shooting longer range gun. And the difference between the 308 and the 306 at the range, where you're shooting at known distances, is just a couple of elevation clicks between the two. There's a slight difference between the influence the wind will have on the projectile, mainly because of the difference in velocity, but it's not that big. From a practical hunting perspective, we rarely hunt beyond, say, 300 meters or 350 yards. And in that distance, if you're not shooting predominantly at really huge animals, the difference is negligible. So there is an advantage if you shoot the 306. It does deliver a little bit of extra velocity and energy at your target if you are prepared to deal with the recoil. But ballistically speaking, they are very, very similar. And if you're in the lucky position where it's easy for you to get the rifles in both of these calibers, and it's not an issue having both of them, you can have one of each. If you're in that fortunate position, can you lower your head for a minute in silence and just think about the rest of us who are not in the position to be able to do that, and who have to make a pick, one of the two. I hope that you found this interesting. If you really found it interesting, please hit the subscribe button and the like button, and we hope to talk soon.